There are many root causes for why America is where it is, why we are here, why we're at the top of a second Trump term after rejecting Trump 4 years ago. There's a reason, there are many reasons why Trump even gained prominence in the Republican primary in 2015, 2016 to begin with. But predominantly, we are here because of identity politics. And the identity politics I'm talking about are not the kind that have come to be associated with that term. It's the identity politics that have arisen in response to marginalized groups recognizing their own needs and advocating for their own liberties and having some modest successes on that front that I'm talking about. The identity politics that have led us down the path to where we are have been, formed out of the grievance politics that were driven by the anger of a predominantly white and non-urban slice of the American electorate in working class communities and jobs, destroyed by the Bush recession and feeling that they were not lifted quickly enough during the Obama recovery. That is just the truth. You can talk around it all you want. We can talk about, a million different things, and we can try and put a legitimate frame on as much of the hatred and anger-based politics that make up the MAGA movement. We'd be talking in vain. It's just the truth. It's the bad faith equation. I'm going to be talking about bad faith a lot on this podcast throughout however long it goes on, because it's so critically important to understand the difference between people operating in bad faith and trying to get a result based on a predetermined desire, and people actually working to get to the truth of any question out there that's political. There's good faith actors and there's bad faith actors, and MAGA has arisen as a result of the bad faith actors getting too much oxygen and too much opportunity to voice their grievances and their anger. It's the bad faith. The reason we are here is the bad faith equation of oxygen and spotlight being absorbed and given to those more marginalized sects of the population through the Obama years, as they gained rights and liberties and getting shown a greater seat at the table, and equating that oxygen and that effort and energy to leaving behind white, rural, working class America. It's seeing social advancements like gay marriage and feminism and the first, female nominee from a major political party and the Black Lives Matter movement, and thinking, wait, my life is super hard. It's getting harder, and I was here first. It's thinking of certain groups of our population as default and the other groups as, we'll get to that when we have time. It's equating walking and chewing gum at the same time, essentially, slowly on both fronts as always, to this is the reason jobs aren't coming back to my area. This is why my wages aren't keeping up with inflation. My healthcare is too expensive. I'm not getting to where I want to be with my career, my job, my house. But all these special snowflake causes are sucking up the attention, and no one's talking about us anymore. It's become a zero-sum game, and it's become a game based on grievance, anger, and identity. Now, Trump rose to power and dominance within the Republican Party and then within our politics as a whole, not by offering any solutions to those grievances. Again, which I said in my first, episode, some of the grievances of being left behind by a slow economic recovery are legitimate and aren't in bad faith. There are people that didn't see the same, their boats lifted by the same tide that lifted many other boats during the Obama recovery. Many felt it was too slow. I think you'll find Democrats agree with that as a whole. even though Obama, turned around an absolute disaster and got us back to a pretty good place by the end of his 8-year term. So Trump, kind of rose in response to that. Trump and Trumpism and MAGA rose in response to that, not by offering solutions, but by fanning the flames of anger and resentment that they cause. And he, his whole thing was, I hate all the same people that you do. I blame all the same people that you do. I'm tired of hearing about these groups as well. And it works. Anger works. And it gains traction. And Democrats have been hemorrhaging white voters since the Civil Rights Act was signed into law in 1964, with only Bill Clinton able to pull nearly even within a few points in both of his elections in the 90s, 92 and 96. But Democrats started losing white voters with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. That's where it started. So think about that and think about why that might be. It's not hard. The pundit class simply cannot acknowledge the reality of why Democrats do not win white voters, where that began, and why it continues. So instead, we set up an eternal campaign to bypass the cause and puzzle over it instead, expecting Democrats to answer with anything but the truth. If white voters fled from Democrats 60 years ago over the legal enfranchisement, and again, Civil Rights Act was the beginning, but the legal enfranchisement of black people, what does anyone in remotely good faith expect when a multitude of other issues enter the fold? If 60 years later, we cannot acknowledge the simple reality that someone who wears a different color skin being seen as equal in the eyes of the law and getting a seat at the table and advocating, very important, advocating for themselves and not having somebody advocate for them, getting a voice in our culture is so deeply offensive to such a large percentage of this country. How can there be even a plausible pretense when other groups with less visible differences step up and ask for the same thing? How can we continually ignore that this divide in America is cultural? It is the war is on cultural lines. It has never been about the economy. It has never been about anything but culture war. And what's more maddening and ridiculous is that on top of this, it's the Democrats' policies in the year 2025 that are still the ones that benefit the working class. White, black, Hispanic, gay, straight, trans, immigrant, or not. The Democratic Party is the party that's putting forth policies and plans, whether it's healthcare with the Affordable Care Act as one of many examples, infrastructure with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, education, Pell Grants, financial well-being, Roth IRAs under Clinton. I mean, like, you name it. And I'm kind of throwing out, stuff off the top of my head as I'm talking. We'll get into it more in future episodes, but it is Democrats that aim to and succeed in helping working class Americans. Are the policies always perfect? Absolutely not. But they often barely get off the ground before the country is swept up in a culture war and elect Republicans as a result, who are so angry about the same things as you, by the way, who come in and dismantle whatever they can to make life better for rich people. And the median belief amongst people in this country remains that Republicans are good for the economy, while Democrats serve special interests and the elite. The opposite of that is true. That is just the truth. That's just the truth. We are here because of the style over substance approach to politics that has dominated for at least the last decade, but I'm sure maybe a little longer. When the Democratic primary in 2016 puts up Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, one of whom has an actionable, largely tangible, and achievable agenda, and one with more of the same anger that excites people, but is ultimately meaningless when it comes to taking action. And it turns into a close race that damages both the nominee and the party brand and allows Donald Trump to win a fluke election bolstered by widespread hatred of his opponent. and free media coverage that turns him into a phenomenon. Donald Trump in 2016 had no real policies, definitely none to help the working class of America, just anger and grievance and I hate the same people as you do. But he ran on identity. He ran on those grievances I was just talking about, pointing pitchforks at immigrants and encouraging people to believe, a population that's already primed to believe, because our population so distrusts politicians and especially female politicians, that Hillary Clinton simply being female is her running on her identity. I will say that again. Pointed pitchforks at immigrants and encouraged people to believe that Hillary Clinton running as a female, being a female and running for office is her running on her identity. And because it's new, it was new in 2016, and it's new because our male-centric society has not allowed it, people believe and adopt it. People came out of both 2016 and 2024 saying, I would vote for a woman for president, but I don't want to just support a woman for president because she's a woman. Nobody's asking you to. When you have two qualified candidates who run for office and who are nominated on the Democratic side, and they're qualified and they have plans and all of that. And, Hillary Clinton, I think, leaned more into her identity as a woman. Kamala Harris didn't talk about her identity as a woman or as a woman of color at all. And yet both of them were stuck with in Kamala Harris's case, it was DEI. And in Hillary's case, it was playing the woman card. Simply running as a woman, simply running as a black person is viewed as running on your identity and identity politics. And that is wrong. The Republican Party is the party of identity politics, not the Democratic Party. We are here because accomplishment and incremental steps towards progress in a country of over 300 million people, where change is only ever meaningfully produced by finding a center of gravity in attitudes and pushing from there, is no longer considered pragmatic in an age where online legislators believe a complicated issue like healthcare or Israel-Palestine or police reform or border control can be boiled down and summarized in a neat little Instagram infographic, and any candidate that expresses less than the perception of the most pure position on this issue or any of those issues is an enemy. Not somebody that even we're talking about disagreements with. They become the enemy. They are wrong. They are hostile, and we have to sink them at any cost. This issue befalls both the left and the right, but the left pays for it exclusively in elections. We are here because the Democratic Party is afraid of its left and center flanks, both of whom take advantage of that fear and hold their votes or flip their votes, knowing that they will make the party squirm. It's a very public humiliation that happens every time that there's elections. Republicans simply cater to their most extreme and hateful voters and are more often than not rewarded for it. We're here because no one expects Republicans to do any soul searching as a party when they lose in 6 years of consecutive elections. Republicans had bad cycles in 2017, in 2018, maybe 2019, I don't remember as well. 2020, 2021 was kind of a mixed bag. 2022 was a bad year for Republicans. 2023 was a bloodbath for Republicans, and then they narrowly won in 2024. But when Democrats lose, we loudly and openly expect them to change, our entire brand after very narrowly losing one election in the midst of an anti-incumbent wave across the globe, where Democrats in America actually overperformed incumbent parties across the world. We're here because Joe Biden can have one of the most legislatively successful presidencies and save the largest economy in the world, not only from collapse, but even from minor recession after a global pandemic, and end his term with a 37% approval rating on average. It might be lower. I haven't checked in a minute, because the media has spotlit only the failures, turned the triumphs into flops, and have normalized his predecessor and now successor, despite him being the one who mismanaged the very crisis that ruined the economy that Biden saved. We are here because our electorate forgets or outright dismisses an orchestrated, violent attempt to overthrow our government within a few months because gas prices are higher coming out of a global pandemic. We are here, frankly, because our country does not realize just how good we do have it compared to the rest of the world. We are largely free to make our own decisions. There's always work. There is always work, often very meaningful work, to be done to make sure that freedom is protected and expanded. Expanded being the key word here. We are largely able to create through lines in our own lives and create paths for ourselves. Again, there's a lot of work to be done to address inequalities and inequities within our system, but the very mechanisms in place in America that give us the ability even to vote, to change things, is something that we take for granted. We are here because as Democrats become the party of the educated, our pundit class pivots from education being a noble aspiration for all and worth the investment to education being an elitist institution that is inaccessible, or something else that Democrats have proposed varying legislation to change, by the way. And that those with educated backgrounds, by their very nature, spit in the face of real and hardworking rural America, as though rural and educated are opposites by nature. Media stirs the pot, Republicans jump on the bandwagon and attack Democrats as educated coastal elites, and everyone just kind of accepts it. We are here because we have collectively decided that the elusive definition of the word authentic only applies to our male candidates on either side of the aisle in expensive suits, but not female candidates in expensive jewelry, and that authenticity and relatability is more important in a leader than intelligence or measuredness or track record or ideas or language or the ability to think over an issue carefully before forming an opinion or a position on it. We've decided that a knee-jerk, immediate stream of consciousness spout off is more real, and that basing it in visible anger makes it truly felt. We are here because every election for president since 2008 has been a change election, except for 2012, where a change in rhetoric and a change in who to pin our anger on is seen as change enough, and with, the policy and history being almost entirely disregarded. The number of times in just the last 3 decades that a Democrat has inherited a bad economy from a Republican and turned it around, that history is completely disregarded. It's erased. And somehow, again, Republicans still get the better for the economy mentality. We are here because a large portion of the country believes that Donald Trump, and not a democratically controlled House of Representatives, sent them a $1,200 check one time 4 years ago, but forgets that Joe Biden and his Democratic trifecta did the same thing, and that the common denominator in both of those equations is Democrats in power. Democrats in power are the reason that those checks happened. And not enough Democrats in power are the reason for the leftists or for the left-leaning people. Not enough Democrats in power are the reason that more didn't happen. We are here because the American population repeatedly hears about all of the good things that they deserve, but also repeatedly vote against the people who want to make sure we receive it, largely due, again, to cultural divides. Because our current electorate has entirely taken for granted the enormous social, international, foreign policy, and hard-fought domestic advancements we have made throughout the 20th century, and how none of it was guaranteed, and how all of it can be lost in much less time than it took to gain. we say never again, and we shake our heads learning about the Holocaust, and then turn a blind eye to, at best, or participate in, at worst, the same behavior, political and everyday, that led to it. Dismissing comparisons as melodramatic and over the top, then electing a president who praised its architect. We bemoan low wages and abusive companies and corporations. Everyone does this. Democrats do this, Republicans do this, leftists do this. Everyone does this. Low wages, abusive companies, we're all working too much. And we say that all we do is slave away for people who don't care about us and view us as numbers rather than people, and then whine and complain when unions go on strike. And we turn around and union bust, and we advocate for further individualism and scoff at organized labor as union membership shrivels in the country. We consistently prioritize convenience over real change that occurred throughout the 20th century that needs to be built upon in order to be cemented. We remember the World Wars and Vietnam and the Cold War and 9/11 and feel a sense of national pride that we stood together during those times, all as we see a resurgence in pushing traditional masculinity to the front and center of our culture, and it never left. Then shrug when Donald Trump appoints 2 soy boy billionaires to lead a new government agency that intends to cut $119 billion from the Veterans Affairs budget. I could and will continue over the next couple of years. When I started listing out what I wanted to say in this episode specifically, I think that was the day that Mark Zuckerberg had just donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. Time named him as their person of the year. The media continues to kiss the ring. But this podcast will probably never have that reach of those people, nor would it necessarily make a difference if it did. One of the biggest reasons that we are here is because the left, that is those from the center to the far left, is at each other's throats all the time, almost all the time, while the right is unified in their cruelty. Roughly half of the elected officials in this country are proudly and openly working to roll back hard-earned rights and protections for working class people, for racial minorities, for women, for gay and lesbian people, for transgender people, for immigrants, both documented and undocumented, disabled people, people who need access to life-saving medications, students of all backgrounds, both financially and intellectually, and on issues like housing and Social Security and healthcare coverage expansion and climate change, are pulling up the ladder behind them in front of our eyes. And by infighting and throwing up our hands and boycotting elections, we are allowing them to do this. They are the only ones benefiting from the divides on the left. They are the only Republicans, and Republican causes are the only people and only causes benefiting from boycotting elections and the left of this country being divided. When leftists point fingers at and spread amongst their circles those they perceive to be the status quo, who in reality don't pass whatever purity test of the day that they've set because they're running to win, the right exclusively benefits from that. When elected officials like Joe Manchin in deep red, West Virginia, or Kyrsten Sinema in purple to light blue areas proudly and excitedly squander rare moments of opportunity to support passable and transformative legislation like the Build Back Better bill that they killed in 2021, which would make a hugely positive change in the country. Instead of opting to appease donors and keep a door open for re-election, the right exclusively benefits. No one else benefits. And the Republican Party, I'm not going to say always gets every single thing that they want, but when a Republican president comes into office, the party's unified behind him or her in the future. And Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema the two senators are really the exclusive reason that Build Back Better failed and that Joe Biden's domestic agenda never saw the light of day in its original form. We got, a watered down version of Build Back Better in 2022 with the Inflation Reduction Act, and that act in itself did a lot of good. But Build Back Better would have been legitimately transformational on so many fronts. And Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema put their own prospects above the country, and didn't support the president in his first year of being in office and didn't allow him to be a transformational president. When we hand wring and we gloom and doom and we air all of our anxieties and turn on our nominee in the most public way, the moment he has a bad debate performance, the media leaps on the blood in the water, and the right benefits because the right is already attacking Joe Biden. And when you add the center and the left also attacking Joe Biden, it weakens exclusively us and benefits exclusively them. Joe Biden ended up dropping out. There was no guarantee that Joe Biden would drop out because Joe Biden won the Democratic primary. No legitimate challenger came forward and built an organization that could take on an incumbent president. That didn't happen. Joe Biden was our nominee because he won our primary. Kamala Harris became our nominee when Joe Biden dropped out because she was on the ticket. The right was the only person or institution or group of people to benefit from what happened this summer. When we, the so-called party of the many, abuse our power within our coalition by dangling the vote of whatever subgroup we belong to within it and threatening to withhold it if a candidate does not meet our demands exclusively at the expense of anyone else, the media pounces and the right benefits. That goes for the far left and for the centrists, or the soft Ds, if you will. Both groups did that this cycle. And every cycle, but especially this cycle. This podcast is titled what it is because the American right, as it currently is in this moment, or at least the dominating forces within the American right, are based exclusively in cruelty and elevating a select few people to have power, existential, overpowering power over everyone else. And it's wrong for the country. It's wrong for the world. And it's wrong for us coming together as people with largely shared interests as Americans, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, whether we realize it or not. America is based in shared interests. I mean, we share a country geographically. We are tied together as part of the same economy. Coming together is of national interest. And on this side of the middle, at least for the next little bit, coming together and recognizing where the true threat lies is the only way we have any shot. There is absolutely a time and a place for disagreements, a very important place for that within the Democratic Party, within the groups of people that largely share values on our side of the middle. There may be a time and a place for a protest vote. I've never seen it. I will never encourage it. I'm never going to encourage a protest vote when every election is a choice between two inevitabilities. We're going to put it that way. That time is certainly not when we are staring down a 6-3 SCOTUS, Supreme Court, with a clear and open anti-citizen agenda. It's not when our president-elect's main focus is revenge and torching the Constitution and threatening to jail journalists and political opponents. It's not when that same president cozies up to our largest nuclear adversary, wishing to emulate its leader. I could go on and on. I will go on and on in the coming months. But the basic premise here is that we are out of capital and luxury time. Every election for the foreseeable future is about survival. It's about survival of the country, but it's about survival of the ability to be a self-governing country. We ceded the right to make the perfect the enemy of the good when we chose as a country and as a party too, voters within the party chose to squander decades of careful progress on November 8th, 2016. One of the things that I've been hearing the last two presidential cycles specifically is this is the most important election. This is the most important election of our lifetime. And everyone on the internet reacting with eye rolls and throwing their hands up and getting so irritable hearing that. And yet you're not going to escape it. Nobody's going to escape it. Every election now is the most important because every election for the foreseeable future is existential.